here. uh, I'd like to welcome everybody. We have Webb Childs here. Before we get into any introductions, I just want to welcome you guys to the first Single-Handed Sailing Society guest speaker series. We hope to have one of these every month. If you've never joined a webinar, you'll be in view mode and audio mode only. You can ask questions toward the end after Webb presents his materials or speaks. And then I will field those questions, and unless there's anything in particular that Webb sees that really he wants to respond to. And with that, let me get started. Oh, and by the way, I may have mentioned this already, but if you're joining in just a little bit late, we are recording. So if you have any issues with that, then at least you should know. So Webb is a sailor, writer, adventurer, poet. He's circumnavigated our oceans 6 times. The last time on his Moored 24 Gannet. And anyone who goes out to sea that many times has a certain perspective, I think, and certain experiences that we all are interested in hearing about. And then so some things came up. I was watching Blade Runner 2049 last night, and it reminded me of the first Blade Runner that came out in 1982, I think, where Rutger Hauer talks about things that he's seen that most people haven't. And I remember, and I was so interested in it, and he says something like this. He says, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've watched sea beams glitter in the dark near Tannhauser Gate." And so it makes me think of you a little bit, Webb, things that you've seen that we have not seen. And so we'd like for you to share some of those experiences. And so please take it away.
All right. It's interesting that you mentioned that quote, because I have quoted that quote myself in my writing, because I felt exactly the same way. I have said, I have seen things that you have not seen. I also like that movie a lot. I'm talking, greetings from the other coast. I'm in Hilton Head, South Carolina. We have a condo here in which we will live when my wife retires in a couple of years. I'm going to hit up here for a moment and change my screen around. If you're seeing what I'm seeing, you're looking out of our unfurnished, basically, living room. And beyond those windows are live oak trees, Spanish moss, Skull Creek, which is part of the Intracoastal Waterway, and a marina, Skull Creek Marina. Gannet, my Moored 24, is about 500 feet from where I'm sitting. It's about a 10-minute walk because I have to go around, and about 5-minute bike ride. I never thought that I would end up in the South, much less a state that sent Strom Thurmond to the Senate 8 times. I have a lot of history in California. I bought my first boat when I lived in Oakland in 1967, took delivery at Jack London Square. The first time I ever sailed alone was taking that boat that day around without an engine. I had ordered an outboard, but it wasn't there, to my slip in Berkeley Marina. I go back to California before that because my grandparents retired to a beach house in San Diego in the 50s. And then I sailed that boat with a woman who was then a part of my life down to San Diego later in 67, lived aboard there, started 3 of my circumnavigations there, finished 2 of them there, including the first and the last. I like California very much, and I've left California for the reason a lot of people have. Property has just become too expensive. So here it's very convenient. I like it here more than I expected. The negatives about this place are the summers. They're too hot in all of coastal South for me now. And there's the hurricane season. So I am 79 years old. This is a fact that amazes me. It amazed me when I was 76 years old. And the idea that somehow, if I make it to November, I'm going to be 80 is like something out of science fiction. This is even more a surprise because my father and both my grandfathers died before age 40. And I, who took the greatest risks, have now more than doubled their lives. That might have been due to chance, but I don't particularly consider myself lucky. It might have been because I planned, I prepared to the extent of my resources. I never did anything at the last minute. And though I've taken risks, I've never taken an uncalculated risk. Of my circumnavigations, I think 3 were cutting edge. The first in an Ericsson 37 that I had made without an engine. Went San Diego 2 stops, became the first American to go alone around Cape Horn. Set what was then the world record for the fastest solo circumnavigation in a monohull. As far as as far as I know, Egregious was the first boat with a modern underbody, fin keel, spade rudder boat to go around the Horn. I'm not sure that's a fact, but I believe it to be so. I was the first American. As far as I know, was the first American not to even try. Cape Horn, if you're thinking of it in terms of all of the hype of the round the world races, well, back in 1975, it was still a frontier. I think I was about the 10th or 11th person to go alone around the Horn, period. My second circumnavigation, after completing that, 2 years later, I left in an 18-foot open boat, a Drascombe lugger. I wanted a new challenge, something that put even more reliance on me. Wanted to do something different. That was true of my 6th with Gannett, with the Amor 24. More 24s, well, you guys run the race. You know that they've been raced to Hawaii. They were built as initially as Round the Boys harbor racer. That they could be raced to Hawaii. Well, I thought if they can race to Hawaii, I can take one all the way around. And I wanted, again, a qualitatively different experience. I have said that I did not want to be like an old rock star who was always singing the songs, re-singing the songs of his youth. I wanted to sing a new song, and I think Gannett and I did. I've owned 3 great boats, and 2 of them were small boats. Chidiac Tichborne, that 18-foot Drascombe lugger, Gannett. The other boat that I considered a great boat was a boat that I named Resurgam, was of a class called a She 36, built in England. Sparkman and Stevens designed a 3/4 tonner. I've owned 2 1-tonners, 1 3/4 tonners. I don't love the IRA, but they were boats that sailed well and that I could afford. Well, one of my lines is that almost dying is a hard way to make a living. And from the mid 70s to the early 90s, I was in a survival situation almost every year. 3 were more severe than the others. On that first circumnavigation, I was at sea for 5 months out of San Diego, well, 2 days short of 5 months, October 18th of one year to March the 16th of the next. San Diego around the Horn, I used to say the sailing directions to sail from California and Cape Horn is that you sail south until your rigging freezes over and then you turn left. The day before the Horn, for several days before the Horn, I did not get any sights. I navigated with the sextant my first 2 circumnavigations. There was no alternative. And I had some sleet or snow. This was in December when it should be getting towards summer. Finally, on one afternoon, I kept going south because to turn too soon east would put me on a lee shore. And late one afternoon, through the clouds, I got a quick sight from a single sight. You don't get a position, you just get a line. But that line convinced me that I was far enough south to turn to the east. And so I did, and late in a gloomy afternoon, I made out land in front of me. They were the Diego Ramirez Islands, which are about 30 miles or so southwest of the Horn. And as I passed them, I knew that no matter what happened, I was going to make it around the Horn. The next day, I'd be blown past just as well, because the next day, a gale grew and became force 12. For one of the few times in all of my voyages, I tied myself in the cockpit and hand steered under bare poles at hull speed and above, surfing down probably 20-foot waves. I had a monitor self-steering vane on that boat, and the servo rudder was in the water. And at times when we went down those waves, a rooster tail went off of that servo rudder like a hydroplane. I was in the cockpit all day, and finally about sunset, let me make an aside. If you read something in one of my books and it says something slightly different than what I am saying verbally, believe the book. This happened a long time ago, and my memory is still pretty good for an old man, but it could be wrong. Anyway, around sunset, the wind dropped back from force 12 to, I don't know, 45 or 50 knots. And I was able to let the monitor steer under bare poles. I went down below. The hull was cracked. It had been cracked for a month. And I was having to bail water out every few hours, most of the time, but I was not able to do that day. So I went down and bailed the water out of the bilge, and there was great satisfaction because I knew that the water I was bailing into the Atlantic that night had come from the Pacific that morning. There are myths. Let me say I dislike hyperbole. The reason being is that it devalues the truth. I think Mae West said, you only live once, but once is enough if you do it right. Well, if you live right, the truth is enough, and you don't have to exaggerate. And there's a myth caused by people sitting in armchairs ashore and looking at the globe and seeing all that empty water down there without a break of land. The waves roll all the way around the world down there. They don't. Montesier said it in one of his books, and I have often said it. And a fact is that after 20-foot waves on December 12th, 1975, a day which obviously I remember, 2 days later, a couple of 100 miles to the east, flat glassy calms so that an albatross landed and swam a circle around Egregious. So that doesn't happen. I've been in force 12 at least 6 and I think 8 times, 4 times on that pass, but all of those except for one were in the Southern Ocean, and the other was a cyclone Colin in the Tasman Sea. I have put the mastheads of 4 boats in the water, which is a club that you probably don't want to join. Egregious's masthead went in the water at least 3 times. Storms in the, I was in the Southern Ocean, but it would be south of the Indian Ocean, between Australia or South Africa and Australia. By the time I got into New Zealand, the sails were blown out. I had hand stitched them. The main was unusable below at least the first reef. Maybe even more. And the hull crack had gotten worse. I was bailing toward the end. I did over 7 tons of water with a bucket out of the bilge, throwing it into the cockpit every 24 hours. I never slept for more than an hour without having to bail. And during the day, I remember that I would read a chapter of a book and bail and read a chapter and bail. And I remember noting that a slow reader would drown that way. The next significant survival situation was with my open boat. About halfway between Fiji and what is now Vanuatu in the South Pacific, it was the New Hebrides then. The wind was blowing about 20 or so, and I was on a broad reach. I slept on that boat. It was truly an open boat. If you Google my name, you'll find my website, Self-Portrait in the Present Sea. There are photos there of the boats and me, various things. There's also a journal, my online journal, which is a separate site, and there are YouTube's a YouTube channel that has pictures, videos from part of the Gannet, from about the last half of the Gannet voyage. I slept on the floorboards of that boat, on either side of the centerboard trunk, usually wearing foul weather gear and usually with a tarpaulin just pulled over me. I was asleep when Gannet Chediac Tichborne hit something pitchpole, threw me out, launched me. She was unsinkable, but she filled with water. I'm speeding this up. I pumped up the inflatable dinghy with my hands sitting in Chediac waist deep in water, and tied the two boats together and drifted for 2 weeks to the nearest land, which, as I say, is now Vanuatu, was then the New Hebrides. I was living on 6 sips of water, half a can of tuna fish a day. I had, as I recall, some crackers, cabin crackers, they call them, and a little bit of jam. The great pleasure I had was having a little taste of that jam every once in a while, because I thought I would reach land. I'd lost my sextant when the boat pitchpoled, but I knew about where I was. I was in the Southeast Trades. They were going to blow me toward the New Hebrides, which are a chain of islands, maybe 50 or so, that run north-south. So I was going to come close to something. And I did on the 14th day. I'm 6'1". I normally weigh what I weigh now, 153, have all my adult life. When I reached land, again, I'm jumping over some things, but they took me to the main island, where Port Vila is the capital. And there was a hospital there, the British base hospital, which was the first place that the casualties from Guadalcanal in the Second World War, the Solomons are a nearby group. Anyway, when they could leave Guadalcanal, they flew them to the British base hospital, as it was called then. And I weighed less than 130 pounds. This was 4 days later. The third was a 20, and the thirst, both of these are about thirst. In my experience, I have twice dealt with terrible thirst, and in my experience, thirst is terrible. Food is just not that important, even if you don't carry a lot of spare weight. But our bodies need sleep and water every 24 hours, and if you go much beyond that without either one of them, you're in trouble. The third of the major survival situations was after I sank Resurgam off of Fort Lauderdale. And I was in the water floating and swimming for 26 hours, waves breaking into my face, into my mouth. And again, the thirst was terrible. That'll do for those. In the Gannet voyage, I was in 255 knot gales, both as I approached land. The last day going into New Zealand's Bay of Islands, and then going into a couple of years later going into Durban, South Africa. I know the Bay of Islands very well. I've kept boats there. I owned a mooring there. It's my favorite place in the world to have a boat. And as I approached, there was a gale which was forecast to go to 55 knots and did. It was on the beam just as I was the last night. All my tiller pilots had died. And so in that morning, with a scrap of jib set, I was out in the I was trapped in the cockpit without my safety harness because I couldn't go down below to get it. And these waves, I'm totally blind in my right eye, have been for about 10 years. Glaucoma, it's complicated, but glaucoma is what ended up doing it. And these waves were on the beam coming from my right side. They were literally blindsiding me. And they were about 10 feet or so, and they were taking Gannett, which is an ultralight, and flipping her over almost onto her beam. I'm on the starboard side, steering with my left hand, braced with my feet against a post that was under what was the bridge for the main sheet traveler, which I have since gotten rid of. But when these waves would come, I was being thrown partially to my feet almost and looking straight down into the water. Well, I couldn't get to the safety harness, so I could reach a sail tie in a cockpit bag, and I tied it around my wrist, and I tied the other end into the tow rail, and then assumed that if my arms stayed attached to my body, I was going to stay attached to the boat. I made it in, obviously. The other was as I approached Durban, I was 7 miles off the mouth of the harbor, and I've been in Durban several times too. I knew the way in. When a gale came up that again blew 55 knots, according to the Met Office on shore, it was a gale against the Ugohas Current. The Ugohas Current is that ocean's coast, the equivalent of the Gulf Stream. I ended up lying ahull for about 36 hours and being pushed back. I was 7 miles from the mouth of the harbor. On Monday morning, I got in Wednesday at noon after being pushed back for about a day and a half. I didn't think they were 20-foot waves, but that's what the Met Office called them 6-meter waves. That's 20 feet. I didn't feel in danger in that storm. I had sea room behind me, and sooner or later it was going to stop, and the waves were not breaking. It was uncomfortable and unpleasant, and I wanted to get in, but I did not consider it threatening. The most dangerous moment of that circumnavigation came unexpectedly on a very nice day, several hundred miles, on the passage from Honolulu to Apia, Samoa, several hundred miles out, excuse me. It was blowing, in my memory, 12 or 14 3-foot waves. It was just after lunch, and I was standing in the companionway. And all of a sudden, I noticed a dark line coming maybe 60 degrees away from the normal wave pattern. In a sense, these were freak waves. They were only maybe 9 feet high, but they were 3 times the normal wave pattern out there. And as they came quickly. I don't know what caused them. As they came, I was able to slide the companionway hatch back, but I wasn't able to reach the slat to put it in the vertical slat. And the first wave took the boat and knocked it onto the beam, masthead right on the edge of the water, and held it there. And then the second wave came and pushed us a little further. And picture yourself in the cockpit. I'm braced against the companionway with my hands and a foot on the pipe berth to keep from falling through the cabin. The boat's 90 degrees, and I'm looking down, and the lee rail is well under the water, and the water is only inches from the open slat area of the companionway hatch. If it gets there and water starts coming in, we're going to go down. And time slowed down. I don't claim to be brave, but I was calm. But time slowed down. It was only a few seconds, but I simply hung on there and watched that water. And it was a matter whether Gannett came back up before that water reached the companionway and started coming below. Well, obviously she came back up and we sailed on, not a problem. About brave, and people often have said that I am brave. I do not believe that. Courage is being brave. Courageous is doing something that you're afraid to do. And I don't do things that I'm afraid to do. I think people make the mistake because I do things that they might be afraid to do. What I think I have is nerve. And nerve is the willingness, once you've prepared to the extent of your resources, planned and prepared to the extent of your resources, to be willing to embark upon an endeavor whose outcome is uncertain and may be fatal. I believe that I have nerve, or at least that quality, whatever you want to call it. So I've spoken for about 26 minutes. I'm going to take a drink of water, and if you guys have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you, Webb. Being the host, I get the first questions. But I want to thank you for your descriptions, and the things that I think about that you say have to do with calculated risk, preserving the boat because that is your home and that is your flotation and that's what keeps you alive, and then staying out of the water. And those things I've always thought about as I've traversed only a short length from San Francisco to Honolulu. I asked my daughter, she's 14 years old, what would you ask of Webb? She sails a little bit, doesn't do as much anymore since she's left summer camp many, many years ago. And she said that others who might be interested in doing what you have done, she says, what would you tell others? For example, like how would you prepare for these circumnavigations?
Well, let me back up to that in the sense that I didn't come from a sailing family. I grew up in the suburb of St. Louis, and nobody there in that family. I was not close to my mother and stepfather in any case. I was close to the grandmother and grandfather who retired to California. So I taught myself how to sail on San Francisco Bay, which is a good place to learn because it offers a lot of complications, currents and wind and all the rest of it. The first thing I would tell anybody preparing is prepare way ahead. I've already said I never do anything at the last minute. People often, in the past, letters, now emails, and when they know that I'm about to leave on a passage, I get these things saying, I know how busy you must be. Well, they're dead wrong. Days before a passage, I am not busy because it's all been done and I'm sitting there looking around just to be sure everything's okay. So prepare a long way in advance. Prepare yourself. Make yourself as strong as you can be and make sailing your boat as easy as it can be. I mean, I'm an old man, but I'm in good shape. I work out when I'm ashore 6 days a week without expensive equipment. I famously can do my age in push-ups, always have been, and I still can, which is a greater achievement at 79 than it was at 30. I do that workout, push-ups, crunches, that kind of a thing, 3 times a week. And I occasionally, whenever I'm feeling good, can go to 100. That, in terms of my age, doing my age in push-ups would carry me through 2042. I'm born in 41, but that would be the next birthday. And that ought to be more than enough. Anyway, prepare. I would try to sail my boat in whatever heavy weather one can. Now, I was preparing out of San Diego, and there isn't a lot of heavy weather there. But the problem with doing that is sometimes just getting the boat out of the marina, if it's in a marina. If you're on a mooring, which I was in, is my preference. I'm in a marina here and I like it, but I was on a mooring in the Bay of Islands. You can always get on and off moorings. I once left Sydney Harbor to sail across the Tasman in a gale deliberately, and I was on a mooring. If I'd been in a marina, I couldn't have gotten out. But being on a mooring, I did. And the reason was there was a low south of me, and as I was in that hemisphere, riding the westerly winds on the north side, had a fine passage across. Anyway, tried to sail. When I was preparing for some years in San Diego, I used to go out in the winter when I could, when it blew hard. Also work out your diet. I don't cook. Literally, I boil water. I have a jet boil stove on Gannett, little camping stove, a little gas cylinder about this big. I heat 2 cups of water in the morning when I can. There are times out there I can't even do that. 4 instant coffee. At night, I boil 2 cups of water, roughly 2 cups of water for a freeze-dried food, freeze-dried meal. My breakfast is uncooked oatmeal, trail mix, out there dried fruit and powdered milk and some protein powder. I have that breakfast here. I had it this morning. Here it's got fresh fruit and fresh milk, and other than that, it's the same. And then lunches out there. For me, are canned stuff. Although some things like Laughing Cow cheese, which you sometimes see refrigerated, but it lasts a long time without refrigeration. So work out your menu, but mostly plan and prepare yourself as well as you can, and then go out and do it. Before I left on that, I got around the Horn on my 3rd attempt. I had 2 attempts earlier, the preceding year, rigging damage both times. But I had sailed egregious 500 miles nonstop. It's the longest I had sailed before I set off for the Horn. From San Diego, I went down around Mexico's Guadalupe Island and back. It's a good course in the sense that it's downwind going and to windward coming back. So sail as much as you can in as adverse weather as you can. So that's what I would do.
You've described some of the hairy situations. Can you tell us about some of those beautiful, wonderful stretches you went on, and the memories that you have?
Well, absolutely. That's what most of it is. I've kept good records since I've had laptops. And on my 5th circumnavigation was in the Hawk of Tuonela, which was a heritage 1-tonner. And it was New Zealand to New Zealand. Did it in sailing time in, elapsed time, less than a year and a half. I just wanted to go sailing. And so I sailed around the world. I actually, as it happened, I found partway through that I was racing myself. I realized that I could make it around faster, I thought, in Hawk than I had when I set the world record in egregious. And I did. I was racing myself, so naturally I won. Wow. But I made it egregious was 203 days. I think it was 202 days and some change. But I made a sailing time in Hawk in 191 days. And I kept good records. My memory is, and that log book is published on my website. I think it's published in a Kindle edition too, maybe. I don't even remember. I think there were only 4 days of gale force winds on that whole circumnavigation, which was a trade wind circumnavigation. So most of it is good. And as a solo sailor, I'm an only child, and it took. That's a good preparation for being a solo sailor. But I talk about going out into what I call the monastery of the sea. And I love the simplicity. I mean, so much of modern life, urban life in particular, and we as a species are not urban. We're meant to be wandering around the veld, picking up things and hunting things. A few years ago, the tipping point came where more than half of us are living in cities. And I read somewhere that it's going to be 70% in mid-century. But out there, and modern urban life is filled with clutter, and cities, even if they mean well, are filled with gratuitous ugliness. Out there, it is pure and clean and clear cut. If you're sailing alone, you're totally responsible for yourself. And there is no ugliness unless you bring it with you. And I love it. It's the my among my, I'm going to mention this at the end, but to be standing in the companionway and the boat is really sailing well. And on Gannet, I stand in the companionway. The boat comes about waist high on me when I'm standing there. She doesn't even have sitting headroom for me unless I sit on the floorboards on a sportaseat facing aft. They're pipers, but if I can sit on them if the boat's heeled over some, but whatever. Anyway, standing there, or sitting in a sportaseat on the deck, listening to music and having a libation as the boat sails in good balance into or away from the sunset is just a beautiful experience. But it is, as I say, it's pure out there, and there is no ugliness, and there are no politicians, and no evening news. Well, I don't watch the evening news much anyway. I get my news by reading on various sites. So yeah, it's mostly that way. It's mostly good. People, well, my experience has been that the survival stories are the ones that sell best. When I almost seriously die, I could sell the same article all over the world and that's legitimate. You don't sell it the same time. You don't sell it more than once in the same market, but it's legitimate to sell it in the United States and England and France and Japan and wherever, and that's happened.
I would have to agree with you. The sea is pure in my limited experience, and it boils down to the basic elements of life. There's an action and there's a reaction and nothing else. And yes, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say, that's one of the great things about a boat. It's a great teaching machine because you do something on a boat and there's going to be a reaction. I mean, for fairly quickly, and you're going to know whether you got it right or wrong. And there's nothing wrong with getting it wrong. You're not born knowing how to do it right, but you need to correct your errors.
I am impressed that you were self-taught. I
haven't taught myself celestial, although the woman in my life at that time, the one who sailed down to San Diego with me, her father was an Annapolis graduate in the 30s, a destroyer captain in the North Atlantic in the Second World War. And after he put in his time and retired, he moved inland. He didn't have anything more to do with the sea, and he couldn't possibly understand how I could voluntarily want to go out there. He would have had, of course, some very serious experiences. But he gave me his Annapolis textbook, Mixter's Primer of Navigation, if I remember correctly, and I taught myself out of that. But well, I've always, I did okay, and I did well enough in school. I was a philosophy major, and that's not so hard to get into grad schools, but I got into Berkeley and UCLA. I got into all the ones I applied to. I didn't really want to teach, but this was during Vietnam, and it was a matter of waiting until I found out what the government was going to do with my body. And when they decided they didn't want me, I dealt with that rejection and got on with my life. But I've always kind of preferred to learn things, to teach on my own. I learned well that way. I read a lot. I don't read about sailing anymore, or hardly ever. And so, yeah, you get a boat and you go out and you make mistakes and correct them.
Thank you. I'm going to open this up to our general Q&A. I know some people are in the chat area, but if you could post your questions into the Q&A, I'm going to go through there and start from the first one. I think you may have answered this already, Webb, but someone asks, have you decided to where next with Gannet?
I missed the question.
The question was, have you decided where to go next with Gannet?
Oh, yes, but it's not all that far. I'm moving toward sailing out around Bermuda, probably in April or May. I have never been to Bermuda. Everybody who has been, I know, says it's a wonderful place, but I'm not interested in going to Bermuda. I'm interested in going sailing. So I'm going to use it as a turning mark. It's a good distance away. I'm surprised, it's due east of here. It's about the western end of the island is about 800 miles due east of here. I somehow had a feeling that Bermuda was somehow further north. So I'm going to do that. And it's likely that this coming winter, assuming the world opens up again, and I expect it will, this winter I may sail down to the Bahamas. I am considering next summer sailing to Scotland, possibly, maybe even probably via Iceland. Iceland isn't all that cold in July or August, so I'm told, and no colder than Cape Horn is anyway. And beyond that, I don't have plans beyond that. I have some inclinations, but I don't know. At my age, I've twice freed myself from the land by making 5-year plans. That was first attempt at Cape Horn. I was living in San Diego where you can predict the weather. And I had a 5-year plan. I saved my money. I bought the boats, prepared them, and I left to the day. Another 5-year plan was after Carol and I were married in 1994. She's an architect and her career was in Boston. And so we set a 5-year plan to leave and kept it as well. We lived aboard Hawk in Boston Harbor year round and for those 5 years. So I have made those plans and kept them. At my age, 5-year plans may be ambitious. I know what I think I'm going to do this year. Gannett is ready to go again. I'm only doing cosmetic stuff on her right now. Well, she isn't right now because I've taken the pipe berths off because they need to be replaced. But last year, before I left San Diego, I had Gannett trucked from San Diego over Labor Day last year. I had all the standing rigging replaced. I do that after every circumnavigation. I had no reason to think there was anything wrong with the old standing rigging, but once around is enough for the wires, and had new jib furling gear put on. The preceding one was Furlex. This is Profurl, which I've used on other boats, and I think it's a bit more sturdy. The Furlex lasted, but one section did come loose, fortunately, and jammed. And fortunately, that was in Panama while I was at the dock, because if it happened out at sea, it would have been a serious problem. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do in the near future. I can say that I have enthusiasm for sailing, say, from from New Zealand around the Horn, with maybe a stop in the Falklands, maybe a stop in the Caribbean, and back to Hilton Head. That would be interesting. I don't have the enthusiasm to sail from Hilton Head to New Zealand. I mean, there are places so I'm still thinking about that. And fortunately, my wife is in the other room and not hearing any of this. So
good. You've mentioned some things about the rigging on the Moor 24. Any other structural things that you may have beefed up or you noticed?
Well, not much. I changed a lot of things when I bought Gannon, who is hull number 40 out of 156, was launched in 79. I bought her 10 years ago this year. I took delivery in May of 2011. She was then in Duluth, Minnesota, and sailing on Lake Superior, and belonged to a guy who used her as a club racer. Of course, they have a very just a limited summer season on Lake Superior, as limited summer season in Chicago. And she was well set up as a club racer, good sales, all the rest of it. I replaced the mast, had Buzz Ballinger built a mast. He knew what I was going to do with the boat. I think that Gannett's mast might be a little bigger section than standard. I told him, and I believe he did, I've always gone up one size on standing rigging on my boats. I know that on the 37s, 5/16 breaks at 12,000 pounds and 3/8 at 17,000. So I think Gannett's standing rigging is a little bigger than others. I fit her with a spare rudder, with an emergency rudder that hung off the transom. The gunnels are there, the rudder's down below. I put a carbon fiber bowsprit on her. I set my boats for more than 20 years have been 3-sail boats, asymmetrical, fully batten mainsail, furling jib. And the furling jibs have gotten ever smaller. Gannett's is nominally a 110, but with the furling gear and the tack knot on the deck, it's really probably about a 100. And what else? I didn't do anything structurally to strengthen the boat. It is to Rod Moore's credit and his workmen that they wouldn't have dreamed when they were laying up hull number 40 that it was going to be sailed around the world. Yet he built a boat that was capable of doing it without significant modification. And her masthead has been in the water 3 times as well. The Windex has been on the YouTube channel. There's one in the Indian Ocean, and I comment that I knew I'd taken a knockdown. I wasn't sure the masthead had gone in the water until the next day when I looked up, and when I looked up at the masthead, the Windex is over to the side. That way you know it's been in the water. Once with Hawk in the passage from Cape Town to Fremantle in the Southern Ocean, just the edges of the Southern Ocean, not deep in the 40s. I took a knockdown and I wasn't sure that everything, if the mast had gone in the water, but then I looked up and I had a electronic wind instrument up there, and I went to look at a reading. I was getting no reading, and looked up and everything had been wiped out up there as well. But I didn't do any structural thing to strengthen the boat. When she was hauled in Marathon, there was a crack at the hull keel joint. It's a bolt-on keel. And that was repaired there. But certainly those knockdowns didn't, probably one of them caused that somewhere. I was not taking on any water from that crack.
The Moore 24, a fine boat, though I'm an Express 27 sailor. I fantasize as I get older, maybe I can get a Moore 24, something a little bit more manageable, handle solo.
It's a good old man's boat.
I have a question about something that that came up about sail flow or state of flow. Can you elaborate on that psychological state of flow during sailing? Is that a term that you've written about in your journal or a book? No? Okay.
No.
All right. Maybe. Yes,
Go ahead.
please.
Well, I was just going to say, you settle in, I settle in to the rhythms of life out there. I don't get seasick. Which
lucky.
is fortunate. I mean, my observation is that there's a bell-shaped curve of seasickness. There are some people who don't get seasick. There are some at the other end of the bell-shaped curve who always get seasick. My last wife was among them. She always had to take medication, but she was always willing to go. And lots of the scopolamine works. There are other things that work as well. And most people in the middle, it bothers them for a few days. Carol sailed 10,000 miles with me on Hawk, and she is one of those who is a little queasy for a couple of days and then settles in. But I truly do settle in. When I navigated with a sextant, there were certain rhythms that imposed. I took a morning sight when the sun was 20 degrees above the horizon. There are refraction tables below that, but I found they weren't really useful. But about 20 degrees, you can count on that, and then take a noon sight. So that imposed some rhythms. I read a lot out there. I keep my journal now usually in, I use an iPad Pro with a keyboard now more than I use in my MacBook, but I have both. There are times out, and they have to, everything in Gannett is subject to getting wet. And if it can get destroyed by getting wet, it's got to be protected. And so my electronics of that kind live in Pelican cases, which are waterproof. A company called Plano makes good waterproof boxes and cases as well. But yeah, I read a lot, I write, I listen to music. After I've spent, I'm not sure, but I've spent, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years out there making passages over the last 50 years. And you settle into the routine, and it is, sometimes you have to work hard sailing the boat, but a lot of the times you don't. And I do not hand steer very much, almost never outside of land. I use tiller pilots on Gannett. I use sheet to tiller self-steering. On my website, I wrote an article about that, how to do it. And if you were to go to my website and go to the articles page, there's one about self-steering if you want to know more about that. I've probably done more than 50,000 miles with sheet to tiller self-steering. On Egregious, when the the Aries was broken, over 10,000 miles. It's all I ever used on Chittiak Tichborne for 25,000 miles on the 2 boats. The first Chittiak ended up in Saudi Arabia when I went ashore with a bent rudder, and they threw me in jail as a spy and then threw me out of the country. And I was glad to go. Anyway, and I use it a lot on Gannett. Works from a close reach to a broad reach. Egregious was a 37-foot cutter, Chittiak an 18-foot yawl, Gannett a 24-foot sloop, all with tillers. All my boats have had tillers. And it works from a close reach to a broad reach. It costs practically nothing. And so it's good. I didn't put a vane on Gannett. The stern is thin, as being a lightweight. To reinforce it, I got a quote of $5,000. Well, I only paid $9,000 for Gannett, and I thought for $5,000 I can buy a lot of tiller pilots, and I have.
I think that tiller to sheet steering is so important, especially when your electronic APs go out, and they do go out.
Yep. Oh yeah. There's a thing called the pelagic, which I was given a prototype, and it did not ever work completely for me. It's below the deck. It may well be a very good answer to that. But the ones on both deck, if there's a lot of water coming over the deck, are going to die sooner rather than later. And so I use sheet to tiller whenever I can under those conditions.
We have a race coming up in April, and one of the divisions we are planning to have is a no electric autopilot division. So it'll be an in the bay race. It'll be interesting how many people enter that and see what sorts of contraptions and winners we get. Someone asked about sleep. Do you sleep through the night, or what is your sleep patterns depending upon if it's easy going, but if it's rough, maybe a couple days? How do you do your sleep?
Well, as I have already said, we need sleep every day. I believe that I have read that if you go a full night without sleep, you're going to be functioning as though you were dead drunk. I have often found people when I was making a passage and got into the next place, and people who were sailing at the same time I was, more or less, not in sight, but crossing the same oceans at the same time and in the same general area, that told me that they went, who knows, without sleep. And they also saw much bigger waves than I thought I saw. I can only remember a handful of times that I have gone an entire night without sleeping. I have, on Egregious, when the hull was cracked, I went months without sleeping more than an hour at a time. So I get some sleep. If things are going well and the boat is sailing smoothly and I'm well away from land, well, in any case, I usually go to sleep really early and go to my bunk about 8, because I'm up every few hours. And if one reads my passage logs, it's amazing how often I'm doing something on deck at midnight. So it's broken sleep, but I get sleep. I make a point of getting sleep. And sometimes it's really hard. On Gannet, I sleep on the windward of the pipe burrs. I have finally in Durban, I put a small spray hood on the boat. But even with before that, even with hatch closed, a lot of water makes it down below. Moors are wet boats. I've said that there's waterproof and there's gannet proof, and gannet proof is only exceeded by submarines, some of which she often resembles. But yeah, I get sleep one way or the other, and it may not be deep and sound, but I get sleep. We need it, and you make bad decisions as well as the physical wearing down of not getting sleep.
Absolutely. When you do get up, whether it's in the day or night, and this is the related question, over those circumnavigations, have you noticed an increase in trash or pollution on the water?
I have not particularly. I'm sure it's there. I read all the stories. There isn't, but first of all, if you go to my website and you look at the chart of all my voyages, most of my sailing has been in the Southern Hemisphere. When you think about it, I've started up here, but mostly, although I finished three circumnavigations down there. I frankly think that the Southern Hemisphere is the better hemisphere. Something like 80% of our species live in the Northern Hemisphere, and most of the problems are in the Northern Hemisphere, and that is not a chance relationship. The Southern Hemisphere, the current systems are basically separated at the equator. So there are a lot fewer people down there, and consequently, there's a lot less trash. In the Mediterranean, which I have not sailed for a long time, but anything that goes into the Med is pretty much going to stay there. And even in the 80s, there was a lot of trash and plastic in the Med. On the Hawk circumnavigation out of Panama near an island, Cocos Island, there's more than one Cocos Island in the world. This is the one that belongs to Costa Rica. One afternoon, I don't know why I had collected there, one afternoon, for the whole afternoon, I sailed through a solid sea of plastic trash. I mean, it was just, it wouldn't have stood your weight, but it was almost solid. I mean, I don't know why. And that was just that one afternoon. So I have not personally seen a big increase in trash out there, but then again, I'm mostly in the Southern Hemisphere. I have, and this is anecdotal, but there seems to be some science that validates it. I see fewer birds than I did 40 years ago, a lot fewer birds. I see fewer signs of fish, which certainly are probably related. And we all see the changes of storms. Here, hurricanes are not a theoretical concern to me. And last year, of course, there were a great many of them, but what was most distressing is the rapid intensification of many of them. A force 1 hurricane is not a big deal. A force 5 is, and several storms went from 1 to 5 in 24 hours last year. So I see the signs of the climate change certainly in the last 40 years. It's anecdotal, but I believe it.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for trash on my 2014 single-handed Trans-Pacific, but I didn't find the things that I expected and read about. I would see floating balls, maybe, I think 1 or 2 glass balls and some netting. And that was about it. But people have told me that it's more tinier pieces. And, I wasn't looking for these little tiny pieces. And of course, they could be floating below the water too. If you did not sail, you're an adventurer. What other things do you think you would have done?
Well, first of all, I am not an adventurer. One of my
Okay.
own lines is that amateurs seek adventures and professionals seek to avoid them. And I think that's a significant, I seek to avoid adventure. It happens anyway, but you want to keep it to a minimum. Um, Before I'm a sailor, I'm a writer, and I would have written whatever whatever I would have done. If my vision was never good, but if it had been good, I would have probably been interested in being a pilot. Uh, uh, I don't know. I would have found something I expect, but I do not know what it would have been. As I say, I'm a writer, would have been a writer no matter what else I did in my life.
With only one eye, I take it that you are considered legally blind then.
No, it's
No?
not. No, because I can still sort of see out of the other one. It is, you can still drive a car when you are monocular. Uh, I did for a little bit, but I was really uncomfortable about it. Your depth perception is affected out to 20 feet. When you're sailing a 24-foot boat, that's your world. And so I am very careful that I can reach out for something and think I have it. I'm sure when I'm sailing Gannet, when I have a handhold, I'm sure I've got that handhold before I put my weight on it. So I gave up my driver's license. I don't drive anymore. So I'm not legally blind. Uh, it is a nuisance, particularly in close. Um, I could I could put a wine glass on the table and go to pour and miss the glass. So you learn to hold the glass up to the lip of the bottle and those kinds of things. It's a nuisance, but I'm, as I say, I am frayed by time, as all of us are. I also have a torn left shoulder rotator cuff. Uh, had that delayed me a year during the circumnavigation just because of the timing. Had to have physical therapy rather than surgery, and they told me I would never do push-ups again, and I was back doing my age in 3 months.
I think you adapt pretty well. You really adapt well. I'm going to go through and let's see, we have some other questions. Did you ever fly an asymmetrical on the Moor?
Yes, all the time.
All the time?
I have it on, this one is a north sail. North has a loft in New Zealand's Bay of Islands. The one that I had before was too full. I wanted to carry it more on reaching conditions. And I think mine is, North calls them a G1, and you can carry it all the way, even forward to the beam. So that I have as I say, I have a bowsprit, a carbon fiber bowsprit. I set it on profurl, what do they call it? Spinnax, a top-down furling gear. I've had general furling gears before, but not a top-down one before, because it was before they were, works really well. So I set it, as a matter of fact, with the Spinnax, I actually set it more often than I ever did before. My feeling about asymmetricals is that for myself, I don't want it all to go to hell in the middle of the night and wake up with the boat over on its side and have to deal with that. And so in the past, if I have a asymmetrical on, if I have any doubt at all at sunset, it comes down. Well, with the Spinnax, I can, from the companionway, without even going on deck, I can furl that sail and get it under control. I still have to go forward eventually to get that off, but the boat's under control without my ever stepping on the deck. So at times now, in the last few years of that voyage, I sometimes would set the asymmetrical if it was the right sail right before sunset. So yes, I set asymmetricals quite routinely.
We're at 3:05. I don't want to press the time if you need to get somewhere, Webb. Good.
Nope.
Thank you. We have a question about, you mentioned a bit of jam while you were adrift, but while you're on Gannett, what is of great pleasure to you?
My favorite liquid is a single malt scotch called Lefroy. And at sunset, to be having a sip of Lefroy is my greatest pleasure. Listening to the music, I don't have great pleasure from the food. I don't mind. I like good food when I can get it, but I can get by without it. So that's not a hardship for me. The best brand, in my experience, of freeze-dried food is a New Zealand brand called Backcountry Cuisine. It is not cuisine, but it's my favorite brand in terms of having stuff, a number of meals that I like a lot. You can't buy it in this country. They don't export here. So I work out a 2-week menu of freeze-dried food, and then I order them and pack them and pack 30 meals, well, 28 meals, that 2-week menu twice in a big trash bag, and that's a month's of food. So the food, none of that, but, on Gannett, I carry box wine. On boats, I carry box wine, and it's not great, but, and I carry other things as well. I have gin. The rule about liquids is there used to be a rule, general, half a gallon of fresh water per person per day. I found on Gannett, I used only about 0.37 of a gallon of water a day, but I get liquids from other sources. I have a box of juice in the morning. I used to, like 20, 30 years ago, carry enough Coca-Cola to, in mid-afternoon, have a Coca-Cola just for extra liquid. I lost my taste for really sweet drinks like that a long time ago. So now I'm not a beer drinker ashore much, but I carry usually a can of beer a day. Although my longest passage to Gannett was Darwin, Australia, Durban, South Africa, 6,000 miles. And I did not carry, and it took almost 2 months, counting the being blown back at the gale at the end. So I don't know how much how many cans of beer I carried, but not enough to have one every day. But that was really for liquid. Someone suggested non-alcoholic beer, and that might be a good idea. I might experiment with that.
Single malt. Okay, that's what I remember.
Well, you heard me say I'm thinking about sailing to Scotland. Well, that's the
there you go.
pilgrimage. That's the pilgrimage.
I have a question about your navigation skills. The person asked, are there navigation skills that you could not have learned no matter how much you practiced? In other words, how much of your navigation skills did you learn on the passages?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I understand that exactly. You learn seamanship on the passages, and you learn to read the sky and the sea. I routinely, at sunset, always, whether I'm having a drink or not, look around and study the sea and the sky and decide, is something bad going to happen tonight? I have had some false positives. I have had times when I thought, well, maybe we're going to have some weather tonight. I don't recall ever being wrong when I said, no, we're going to be okay tonight. And so what you're looking for there are differences, waves a little bigger than they were, or from a slightly different angle, or looking at the clouds and trying to figure out what the changes are. As far as navigation, as I said, the first two I used a sextant. Now I use, my chart plotter was on the last navigation. It wasn't this phone, it was my iPhone. I have the charts of the world for that circumnavigation in the phone. I used iNavX and iSailor, the two different apps. So it's a matter simply now of reading what the phone tells me. It's one of the really good things about that is that on Gannett, those pipers, there's a little bin at the head of them. And I can put the phone in there and I can wake up in the middle of the night and turn it on and see our course, our speed, how far we've, if I want to, how far we've come from the noon position the preceding day. And it's just right there. I do think in terms of navigation, I have a sextant on Gannet, a plastic sextant. I used to have good sextants, metal sextants in the old days. And I think it's wise if you go offshore to have a sextant and know how to take a noon sight for latitude. That's really easy. It doesn't require much. And you think, well, you only know your latitude. Well, most of the great exploring voyages of history were made by people who, by sailors who didn't know anything except their latitude, excuse me.
And another question here. Weather forecasting, long-term weather forecasting, downloading weather. So you do it like old Hawaiian style.
I have no contact with, well, I have a reservation there. When I go to sea, I go to sea. And Gannet is the first boat on which I could possibly send a distress signal. I have a yellow brick tracker on Gannet, and I can send and receive emails on it. Only my wife has that number, and I don't, on a passage, I bought the tracker so she would know where I am. Other people look in and they want to follow the passage, and they can do so as well. Once a week, usually on a Saturday morning, I send her an email, a very short one, and saying, I'm fine. And she usually sends me one back saying, good, I'm fine too. And that's it. I think that I once just, one definition of schizophrenia, a solo sailor who's a party animal. I think that solo sailors who go out on the passages and who communicate with the land every day, who blog or whatever, are really not in the moment. They have not left the land behind. They're still connected. I disconnect. And before Gannet, I have never had anything more than a handheld VHF on my boat to talk to officials as you get into port. There is a big difference from working without a net. I was recently rereading Endurance about Shackleton's expedition, and a friend, an American who lives now in Australia, told me about a book called Shackleton's Forgotten Men. Shackleton was going in on one side of Antarctica. That was the idea, and the Endurance was caught in the ice and crushed. But he sent a ship to the other side to lay out food depots for them after they'd reached the South Pole, so they didn't have to carry everything over the ice with them. And those people on the other side underwent greater hardships than even Shackleton did in the Endurance. 3 of them died. Well, in modern days, that wouldn't have happened. Shackleton would have gotten into the ice and gotten on the radio, and an icebreaker would have been sent, or an airplane would have taken them out. And the people on the other side would have known all that and not tried to die, well, not died trying to do their job. Well, they did do their job. So if you go out, I actually have suggested in print, I think Sailing Anarchy wrote it, that not only should there not be more life-saving ways to communicate for solo sailors, it ought to be illegal. If you go offshore and decide to leave society behind, you have no right to expect society to come and save your sorry rear end from trouble of your own making. Well, I worked without a net for 5 circumnavigations. And with the reservation is that my blindness in this eye started with a detached retina. And that came on without warning. There was no like a bump on my head or anything. It was just one day I started seeing what a kind of black snow, which I now know is one of the first signs of a detached retina. Well, if I were out in the middle in the ocean and the other retina detached, I'm screwed. And maybe then I would try to hit the button on the yellow brick and ask for help. But basically, I go out there and I disconnect, and that's part of the beauty of it all.
I share that. kind of feeling. I think there's also a pressure sometimes, though, when you're out at sea. People know that the technology's there, and sometimes even your own spouse expects you to carry on extended communications when my excuse is that it's too windy. All hands
Well,
are needed on deck.
well, Carol's good about that, but on the other hand, I was 52 years old when we got married, and I'd already been doing this for a long time, so there was truth in advertising. She knew she didn't marry an insurance salesman who's one morning said, "Oh, I want to sail around the world." So she's good about it.
Why the More 24 and not something like an Express 27 or a Santa Cruz 27?
Oh, no, there's no reason why. I knew of Moore's. And there was one available. I don't know the other boats. I don't know that they are as well built as Ron Moore's boat, but I knew of Moore's. So there was just a choice made based upon the information I had. I knew they were good boats. The others may be equally good. I just didn't know that, and I don't even know it now, not having seen the others up close.
Just by chance, then. It was the More 24. Someone is asking about AIS and collisions.
AIS is fine. I don't have one. Collisions are less of a problem in the Southern Ocean than they are in the Northern. In my experience, and I sailed the Med in Chidiac Tichborne 2. The first one stayed in Saudi Arabia. I bought it retail, but the builders gave me a second one and shipped it out to Egypt to me. I went down the Red Sea to cross my track the preceding year and back through Suez. And then I sailed the Med with just one stop, Suez to Port Said to Malta, Malta to Portugal. Solo sailing around Europe is dangerous because there are so many harbors and so many ships and so many fishing boats and coming at you from so many different areas. And then later I bought my Seagram in England, sailed from Ipswich to Brighton around to Portugal. I don't want to generate the power to have AIS on all the time. Gannett is completely self-contained. She has 4 50-watt Solbian, that's the brand name, solar panels on deck. They charge 2 Group 24 AGMs down below, and everything else runs off of that. That Gannett's outboard is torpedo electric, and I can charge that battery off of it. But I don't have any. The masthead LED is, well, masthead is tricolor is an LED. I don't want to generate the power drain to have that on all the time. So I think AIS is fine, nothing wrong with it, although I think there are a lot of illegal fishing boats that don't have it on around Africa and some other places as well, deliberately turn it off.
Yes. Maybe one more question before we give you some last words, a parting shot. And that question would have to do with when you're out there, do you ever miss land? And then when you're on land, do you ever miss being out there?
The latter is yes, I do. I miss being out there right now. I finished the Gannett circumnavigation 2 years ago this April, and I have always thought that no matter what you've done, so what have you done lately is a good question, and I think I legitimately can get by for a couple of years with that last circumnavigation, but it's becoming a good question. Out there, the British used to talk about channel fever. As the ships came up the channel, they wanted to get in. Well, when I get close, I want to get in. I want to get it done, whether the weather's good or bad. But out there in the middle, no, I don't I want the boat to be sailing well. I want to be making progress. Gannett's last passage was brutal, not because of severe weather, but because there was no wind. Panama up to San Diego. 5 of the 6 slowest weeks of the entire circumnavigation were on that passage. The other slow week was in the doldrums in the Atlantic. And I had one day's run, noon to noon, of 16 miles. And a week later, I had a day's run of 14 miles. There would be wind for 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, and Gannett would sail at 3 or 4 knots. And then it would, and my hopes, oh, this is going to hold. Well, sunset, it died. And then the current would push me back. And that was very frustrating. And so I certainly wanted that to be over. I wrote or said, there were times in the middle of that, if I could have ended it right then, I would have, but I couldn't, so I didn't. I kept on, and people kept thinking I would, who were following my track on the yellow brick, that I was going to go in. I came really close to Cabo San Lucas, but I didn't. I made it all the way to finish it. I'm good at staying out there and finishing it. So yeah, in the middle, no, I'm not missing the land. As I get close, except certainly on that passage I was. I didn't, not the land, I just didn't want to be sitting out there dead in the water for any longer. And I started having to ration water because I wasn't sure. I had enough, as it turned out, but it could have turned out differently. So, but yeah, in the middle, no, I've settled in and I'm good.
Some final words from you, please.
Well, I've alluded to this already in part. During that 26-hour swim, with the waves breaking and my eyes and my throat raw, Resurgam sank at 3 a.m. one morning, went in the water. And so I went through the next day and then the next night, and I was wearing out and I was in pain, my shoulder from elbow from swimming. And toward the end that night, I knew my direction simply from the moon when it came up, and so I could know which way was land. And toward the end, I was hallucinating and knowing I was hallucinating. And I thought I saw, and I'm still way off. I mean, well, I don't know where I am exactly, but I'm offshore. And I thought I saw the lines of a sailboat somewhere, the rigging lines. And then and a light. And then I saw another light over to my left. And I stopped and I'm vertical in the water. And I'm thinking, well, which of those is real, if either? And for whatever reason, I decided to head to the one to my left. And I did. And as I came closer, it looked like about a 40-foot fishing boat. And I still wasn't sure it was real. And I went, as I came within, and I'm moving really slowly, swimming at this point. But as I came closer, I had the feeling that it was somehow moving away from me. Well, of course, it was the Gulf Current stream carrying me away from it. And I yelled, the traditional help. And I see two guys come up, and another light comes on. I've seen one light, like an anchor light. Another light comes on, and I see 2 people come up on deck. And they were young guys in their 20s, fishermen. And they started waving a searchlight around, and they finally got it on me. And I said, "Don't go." And they said, "We're at anchor," or we're shouting. So I make my way over there, and I get to the stern, and I could grab on, but my legs were gone, and I was too weak. And they pulled me up over the transom and into the cockpit. And my thought wasn't, I'm going to live. My thought was, I'm going to get a drink of water. So, as you know, I normally have a drink at sunset. The sun has set here while we've been talking. So when we sign off, I am going to have my delayed drink. and I'm going to raise my glass. I'm going to raise it to you and to me and to our dreams and to the passion to fulfill them. I wish you sailing joy.
Thank you, Webb. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen and to hear about your experiences. And I'm sorry to the questions and answers, or the questions that we could not get to. I just want to say, lastly, that Webb has done this free, hasn't asked us any money from the Single-Hand Sailing Society. However, on his behalf, we'll be making a donation to the Treasure Island Sailing Center. So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Webb. And I
My
will be
pleasure.
leaving, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. All the
Bye-bye,
best.
everyone.